It was a typical busy evening at Keanu Reeves's upscale restaurant in Los Angeles. The aroma of freshly prepared dishes filled the air, and the soft clinking of silverware echoed throughout the dining area. Keanu, who frequented the restaurant to ensure everything ran smoothly, was walking through the kitchen when he noticed something unusual. As he approached the back of the restaurant, where the staff usually gathered during their breaks, his eyes caught sight of a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, long brown hair cascading down her back. Her name was Jessica, a waitress who had been working at the restaurant for a few months. She had always been quiet, diligent, and seemed to blend into the background, but tonight, something was different. Keanu watched, frozen in place, as Jessica reached for a half-eaten plate of food left by a customer at a nearby table. She quickly gathered the remaining bits of pasta, salad, and bread, placing them into a takeout box. It was a shocking sight for him. This wasn't the usual way employees took their breaks. In fact, he'd never seen anyone take leftover food without permission. Is this really happening? Keanu thought to himself, stepping back to hide behind a door frame, not wanting to make his presence known just yet. Keanu wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but this act made him uncomfortable. What had led Jessica to take leftovers in such a hurried manner? He knew the restaurant had a policy against taking food home, even for employees. The ethics behind this gesture seemed questionable, but Keanu was determined to figure out the reason behind it. As Jessica stuffed the food into her bag, she glanced around quickly, ensuring no one else saw her actions. That's when she caught Keanu's gaze, a mix of surprise and guilt in her eyes. Keanu didn't say anything immediately. His mind raced as he thought about how best to handle this. Was this just a simple act of desperation, or was something deeper at play? Keanu knew Jessica's work ethic. She was always on time and polite with customers, but this was a side of her he hadn't seen before. Keanu took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He wasn't angry. He was curious. He was about to approach Jessica when his manager, Steve, walked by with a clipboard in hand, oblivious to the scene unfolding. Jessica quickly darted out of the kitchen, her face flushed with embarrassment. Keanu stood there for a moment still, processing what he had just witnessed. He needed answers, but how would he go about it? What should he do next? What would you do in Keanu's shoes? Would you confront Jessica, or would you wait to understand the situation better? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Keanu Reeves had always prided himself on running a restaurant that felt more like a family than a business. His philosophy was simple: treat your employees with kindness and respect, and they'll deliver the same to the customers. For him, the restaurant was not just about food. It was about creating an environment where people felt valued, both as workers and as individuals. It wasn't the money that mattered most to Keanu. It was the relationships. But today, Keanu found himself wondering if he'd missed something. Jessica was a key part of that family, a young woman who had quickly become known for her hard work. She had an infectious smile and always greeted customers warmly. But what was hidden beneath that smile? What had led her to the point where she was stealing leftovers? To understand what was going on, Keanu needed to know more about Jessica. Jessica had always been a fighter, though not everyone knew it. She had grown up in a small town outside of Los Angeles, raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. Jessica had seen the sacrifices her mother made every day, and it had instilled in her a strong sense of responsibility. But despite her best efforts, she'd always felt like something was missing. When Jessica moved to LA, she hoped for a fresh start, a chance to build something for herself. She had taken the job at Keanu's restaurant as a way to support herself, while pursuing her dream of becoming a graphic designer. But life in the city hadn't been kind. The cost of living was sky-high, and the bills piled up faster than she could keep up. Though she was doing her best to stay afloat, Jessica often found herself running on empty. She'd gone without meals more than once, skipping lunch or dinner, just to save a few dollars. Even when she worked long shifts, her paychecks barely covered rent, utilities, and her student loans. The small meals that came with working at the restaurant were the only meals she had most days, and sometimes, when the customers left more than they could finish, she found herself in a situation where she needed it more than they did. But Jessica wasn't the type of person to ask for help. She didn't want to be seen as weak or unworthy of her position. The thought of explaining her struggles to Keanu or any of her co-workers felt humiliating. She didn't want anyone to know how tough things were behind the scenes. Instead, she quietly took the leftovers, not for pleasure but out of necessity. Keanu, for all his fame and fortune, had lived through his own share of struggles. Growing up, he had seen the hardships that came with financial instability. His mother had worked tirelessly to raise him, and he had learned early on that hard work and dedication were the keys to overcoming adversity. However, he also understood the importance of empathy. He knew that everyone carried burdens, and some were harder to bear than others. He often made it a point to check in on his staff, to learn about their lives outside of the restaurant, and to be a source of support when they needed it. Yet with Jessica, he had never felt the need to dig deeper. She was always so professional, so composed. There was never a sign that she might be struggling. Now he realized how little he knew about her life, and it bothered him. Was there more to her situation than met the eye? And what about the others? How many of his staff members were quietly fighting battles of their own? As Keanu stood by the door to the kitchen, watching Jessica's hurried exit, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to help her. But how? Should he confront her directly about what he had seen, or should he approach it more delicately, understanding that there was likely more to the story than just a simple act of taking leftovers? One thing was certain: he couldn't let this slide. If Jessica was truly in need, he had to find a way to offer help without making her feel ashamed. But first, he needed to know the whole truth. Would you confront Jessica, or would you try to find out more first? What's the best way to handle a situation like this? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Keanu spent the rest of the night lost in thought, replaying the moment he saw Jessica taking the leftovers over and over in his mind. His usual calm demeanor felt shaken, and he couldn't help but wonder how much he had missed in his own restaurant. He had always taken pride in creating a supportive work environment, but now, as he reflected on Jessica's actions, he began to question whether he truly knew what was going on behind the scenes for his employees. The next morning, Keanu found himself standing in front of the kitchen, waiting for Jessica to arrive for her shift. He had spent the night mulling over his options. He didn't want to be confrontational, but he couldn't ignore what he had seen. He needed to talk to her, to understand what was really happening. When Jessica walked into the restaurant, she was the same as always, put together, professional, a little shy. But Keanu could see the hint of nervousness in her eyes. She had probably been dreading this conversation all night. "Hey, Jessica," Keanu greeted her softly, trying to keep his voice casual. "Can we talk for a second?" Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She was immediately on guard. She knew exactly what this was about. She had no idea how to explain herself, and she wasn't sure how Keanu would react. Would he be upset? Would he fire her on the spot? "Of course, Mr. Reeves," she replied, her voice wavering slightly as she followed him into the small office behind the kitchen. Once they were inside, Keanu closed the door behind them, turning to face her. His expression was warm, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "Listen, I just want to talk about something I noticed last night. I saw you, well, taking some of the leftover food." Jessica's face immediately flushed with embarrassment. She had hoped Keanu hadn't noticed, that maybe it had gone unnoticed in the bustle of the kitchen. But now that the subject was out in the open, she felt exposed. "I didn't mean any harm," she said quickly, her voice low and apologetic. "There's just sometimes the food is too much and it goes to waste. I was just taking a little for myself. I wasn't stealing it. I just..." Keanu raised a hand, cutting her off gently. "Jessica, I'm not upset. I just want to understand why you felt you needed to do that." Jessica's shoulders slumped, and for a moment she felt like the weight of the world was on her. She could feel her eyes starting to burn with tears, but she fought them back. She had always prided herself on being strong, but now in front of Keanu she couldn't keep up the facade anymore. I don't know how to explain it. Things have been hard lately," Jessica said, her voice cracking. "I don't make enough to cover everything. My rent, bills, student loans, it's all just piling up. Some days I don't even have enough money for food. I've been trying to make it work, but it's hard. And I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want to seem weak or like I was failing." Keanu listened quietly, his heart aching as she spoke. He hadn't expected this. He had no idea that Jessica was struggling so much. "Jessica," he said, his voice softening, "you're not failing. Everyone goes through tough times, and it's okay to ask for help when you need it. You don't have to hide it." She looked up at him, startled by his words. "But I don't want to be a burden. I don't want people to think less of me." Keanu smiled reassuringly. "You're not a burden, Jessica. You're part of this team, and we all support each other. If you need help, I'm here for you. No one's going to think less of you for asking." Jessica felt a wave of relief wash over her, although the sting of shame still lingered. It was the first time someone had really offered help without making her feel like she was asking for charity. She had always felt like she needed to handle everything herself, but Keanu's words made her question that mindset. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I'll stop taking the leftovers, I promise." Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a comforting squeeze. "You don't need to apologize, Jessica. Just promise me one thing. If you ever need anything, you'll come to me. We'll figure it out together." Jessica nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. She had never felt this kind of support before, not from a boss, not from anyone. She had always believed that asking for help was a sign of weakness, but now she saw that it could be a sign of strength. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. Keanu smiled warmly. "No problem. You're part of this family, Jessica. We look out for each other." As Jessica left the office, her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Keanu's kindness had shattered the walls she had built around herself, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. Keanu, meanwhile, was left, standing in the quiet office, deep in thought. His conversation with Jessica had opened his eyes to just how little he knew about the lives of his employees. He thought he had created a supportive environment, but there was still so much more he could do. He wasn't sure what the future held for Jessica, but he knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore, and neither were the other employees who might be silently struggling just like her. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Would you have handled things the same way as Keanu? Let us know in the comments below. The next few days at Keanu's restaurant unfolded like a quiet storm. Keanu had made the decision to keep things between himself and Jessica private for now, but a part of him knew he couldn't just stop there. He was determined to make the restaurant an even better place for everyone who worked there, not just in terms of pay or food, but in terms of understanding, support, and community. It was time for a change. Keanu began spending more time with his staff, engaging with them during their shifts, having more one-on-one conversations, and even organizing regular meetings where they could all share their thoughts. He wanted to create an environment where everyone felt safe to talk about their problems, whether it was personal or professional. For Jessica, the conversation with Keanu had been a turning point. His kindness had put her at ease, but the relief didn't last long. Every time she sat down to pay her bills, the weight of her financial burdens crushed her again. The shame she had carried around for so long began to lift, but the stress of living paycheck to paycheck remained. She didn't want to admit it to Keanu, but there were still days when she barely had enough money to eat. And now, with her recent decision to stop taking leftovers, she found herself hungry more often than not. But things were starting to shift. Keanu's actions had not gone unnoticed. He had subtly begun introducing changes that made life easier for the staff. More flexible hours, extra incentives for those going above and beyond, and even a small emergency fund for employees who found themselves in dire situations. These measures, though small, had already started to make a difference. Jessica felt a strange sense of hope for the first time in months. One afternoon, as Keanu walked through the restaurant, he stopped by the kitchen to check on things. His eyes caught a glimpse of a new staff member, Sophie, a young woman with short red hair and a quick smile, who was chatting with Jessica. They were laughing over something trivial, sharing an inside joke. But as Keanu watched them, a realization hit him hard. In the past, He had thought that just offering good pay and a positive environment was enough. But he now understood that something deeper was needed. His employees didn't just need a job, they needed a support system, a place where they could feel valued and understood, especially during hard times. That's when it hit him. The restaurant was structured, focused on customer service and the perfection of each dish, had overlooked the employees' emotional and financial well-being. The waitstaff, the cooks, the cleaners, they were all doing their best, but often at the cost of their own health and happiness. Keanu realized that while the business was thriving, the people who made it run had been silently suffering. Keanu decided it was time to take action. That night, after closing hours, he gathered the entire staff for a meeting. Everyone took their seats, unsure of what the boss had planned. Keanu, standing in front of them, looked around the room, his gaze resting on each face. He could tell that many were tired and a few seemed downright exhausted. He cleared his throat and began to speak. "I've been thinking a lot about how things have been going around here," Keanu started, his voice calm but firm. "And I realize I've been missing something. We've built a great business here, but it's not just about the food or the customers. It's about all of you. You're the heart of this place. And I want to make sure you're not just doing your best for the restaurant, but also taking care of yourselves." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Starting tonight, we're going to be making a few changes. First, we'll be launching an employee assistance program. It'll cover everything from mental health support to financial advice, to make sure that everyone here has the resources they need. No one here should feel like they're alone in facing their challenges." The room fell silent. For the first time, Keanu saw the staff members exchange glances, unsure if they had heard him correctly. "And secondly," Keanu continued, "I want to make sure no one here is ever hungry or struggling silently. From now on, I'll be setting up a staff meal program. You'll have access to fresh meals during your shifts, so no one has to go without food. If you need more, I'll make sure you can take some home." Jessica felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The weight she had carried for so long suddenly felt lighter. Keanu wasn't just offering a handout, he was giving them dignity. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe she wasn't invisible anymore. After the meeting, the restaurant buzzed with a newfound energy. Staff members, once quietly harboring their own struggles, began to open up about their challenges, sharing stories with each other that had been hidden for months. Some employees admitted they had been struggling to pay rent. Others shared their concerns about their families. Keanu watched, a quiet satisfaction building inside him. As he observed the change, it wasn't just about the programs, it was about giving his team the confidence to express their needs. For Jessica, the impact was immediate. She found herself looking forward to each day at work, not just because of the meals she could now count on, but because the restaurant no longer felt like a place where she had to hide. She could breathe a little easier, knowing that if she needed help, it was there. Later that evening, as Jessica was preparing to leave, Keanu approached her. He could see the difference in her demeanor. Her shoulders were no longer slumped, and she had a smile on her face that hadn't been there a week ago. "Hey, Jessica," Keanu said, catching her before she left. "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Is everything okay?" Jessica smiled warmly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Yeah, things are better, a lot better. Thank you for everything. I can't tell you how much it means to me. This job, the meals, the support." Keanu smiled, his heart full. "It means a lot to me too. You're doing great, Jessica. Don't forget, you don't have to carry everything by yourself. We're in this together." As Jessica left that night, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time she believed she could handle it, knowing she wasn't alone. How do you think this new approach will affect Jessica and the rest of the staff? Can Keanu's actions change the dynamics of his restaurant for the better? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The next few weeks at Keanu's restaurant felt like an entirely new chapter. Employees were more engaged, happier, and the overall vibe of the place had shifted. It wasn't just about the meals anymore. It was about the people who worked there. And Keanu had managed to foster a sense of camaraderie and trust that hadn't been there before. For Jessica, the changes were more than just logistical. The restaurant had become a safe haven, a place where she no longer felt like an outsider or someone who was just barely hanging on. She had started to take advantage of the employee assistance program Keanu had introduced, meeting with a financial advisor to get a handle on her debt and budgeting. But as things seemed to be looking up, Jessica's life outside the restaurant was still complicated. She had been avoiding a tough conversation with her mother for months. Her mom had always been her biggest supporter, but their relationship had strained over the years. Jessica hadn't wanted to admit to her mother just how hard things had become, not wanting to burden her any more than she already had. One evening after finishing her shift, Jessica received a phone call. It was from her mum. "Jessica, honey, we need to talk. I'm worried about you." Her mum's voice crackled over the phone. Jessica's heart sank. She hadn't been expecting this, but deep down, she knew it was coming. Her mother had always been perceptive, always knowing when something wasn't right. "Mum, I'm fine," Jessica replied, her voice a little too quick, too defensive. "I promise everything's okay." "No, it's not. I can hear it in your voice. You're struggling, and I know you don't want to admit it," her mum said gently. "I've been talking to your aunt, and we're planning a visit next month. I want to help you, Jessica. I don't want you to feel like you have to handle everything alone." Jessica's throat tightened. She couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears she had been holding back for so long started to well up. For so long she had tried to handle everything by herself, thinking that asking for help made her weak. But her mum's voice, filled with concern and love, made her realize that it wasn't weakness, it was strength. "I'm sorry, Mum," Jessica whispered through the tears. "I didn't want to worry you, but I've been struggling. I don't know how much longer I can keep it together." Her mum's voice softened. "Sweetheart, you don't have to do it alone. You never have. To do it alone." Keanu was in his office when Jessica walked in later that evening, her eyes red from crying. He had noticed the change in her as soon as she entered. Her usual upbeat energy had dimmed, and for the first time he could see the weight of her struggles etched across her face. "Jessica," Keanu asked, his tone filled with concern, "is everything okay?" Jessica hesitated for a moment, then sat down in front of his desk. She looked at him, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. I just had a conversation with my mom. I've been trying so hard to keep everything together, but it's been breaking me down. I'm not okay, Keanu. I've been hiding it for so long and I don't know what to do anymore." Keanu's heart ached for her. He had seen the strong, independent woman at work every day, but now as she revealed her vulnerability, he understood just how much she had been carrying. "You don't have to go through this alone, Jessica," Keanu said gently. "We've got your back. You don't need to hide what you're going through. Whatever you need, we'll figure it out together." Jessica wiped at her eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and shame. "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly. Keanu shook his head, smiling softly. "You're not a burden. You're part of this family, and we help each other. That's what it's all about." For the first time in what felt like forever, Jessica felt the weight on her shoulders ease. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to carry everything on her own. And as Keanu sat there, offering her understanding and support, she realized how much her life had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a worker at the restaurant. She was someone who mattered. Later that week, Keanu made another decision, one that would change everything for Jessica and for the rest of the employees. He called a staff meeting to announce a new initiative he had been planning for months. "I want to make sure that everyone here is not only taken care of at work, but also in their personal lives," Keanu began, standing before the group. "So, we're launching a new partnership with a local community center to provide free counseling, financial workshops, and even career development programs for everyone who works here. You're all a part of something bigger, and I want to make sure you're supported no matter what." The room erupted in applause. Jessica, sitting in the front, couldn't help but feel a lump rise in her throat. Keanu wasn't just providing meals or assistance for immediate needs. He was thinking long-term. He was showing that he cared about his employees' futures, not just their present struggles. Keanu's actions had shaken the very core of the restaurant, creating a new environment where people didn't have to pretend everything was okay just to get by. They could be real, they could be vulnerable, and they could lean on each other when they needed it most. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, Keanu was confronted with a surprise. The following day, one of the restaurant's regular customers, an influential local entrepreneur named Michael, approached him after his meal. Michael had been a loyal patron for years, but today he had something else on his mind. "Keanu, I've been hearing a lot about the changes you've been making here," Michael said, his tone a little too casual. "And I gotta say, I'm impressed, but I'm also a little concerned. You're running a business, right? Don't you think this whole support system thing could be a distraction? If you keep giving your employees all these handouts, what's next? Are you sure this is the direction you want to go?" Keanu paused, taken aback by the question. He hadn't expected to be challenged so directly, especially not from someone who had always supported him. "Michael, I get your concerns," Keanu said calmly, his gaze steady. "But the thing is, when we take care of the people who make the business run, they take care of the business in return. I'm not just building a restaurant, I'm building a community. And that's worth more to me than anything else." Michael eyed him skeptically, but seemed to take Keanu's words to heart. As he left, he gave a slow nod, acknowledging the conversation without further comment. Keanu knew that not everyone would understand his vision, but as he watched Jessica and the rest of the staff thrive, he knew he had made the right choice. The restaurant had become more than just a business. It had become a place where people could find support, where they could grow, and where they could truly be themselves. As for Jessica, she found herself looking forward to each new day, no longer burdened by the weight of her struggles. She had Keanu's support, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a future worth fighting for. Do you think Keanu made the right decision? Should he have focused more on the business side of things, or did his actions create a better environment for everyone? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The days after the emotional meeting had an unexpected effect on Keanu's restaurant. The employees, who had once been struggling to stay afloat, now felt more energized and focused. For the first time in a long while, Keanu saw them not just working hard for the paycheck, but working hard because they felt a deep connection to the place. They were no longer just employees, they were part of a larger community, a family that had each other's backs. Jessica in particular began to blossom. She took advantage of every resource Keanu had set up for the employees, from the financial workshops to the counseling sessions. Slowly but surely, she began to feel like she was in control of her life again. The stress of her mounting bills, the emotional toll of pretending everything was fine, these heavy burdens were no longer weighing her down. She had started to see her future in a new light. The conversations she had with the financial advisor were changing her perspective on money, teaching her how to budget, save, and even invest in herself. With Keanu's encouragement, Jessica began setting long-term goals, ones that didn't just focus on getting by, but on thriving. She even started looking into furthering her education, dreaming of someday moving beyond her current role at the restaurant. More than that, Jessica began to feel a renewed sense of confidence. She knew she wasn't perfect, but she had learned that it was okay to ask for help and to lean on others. No longer did she feel the need to hide her struggles. Instead, she shared her journey with her co-workers, and they shared theirs with her. It was a quiet but powerful transformation. As Keanu watched Jessica and the other employees grow, he couldn't help but reflect on his own journey. When he first opened the restaurant, it had been about passion for food and hospitality. But over time, it had become about more than just that. It had become about creating a space where people could find not just good food, but a place where they could heal, grow, and feel seen. Keanu had learned that the success of a business wasn't just about the bottom line. It was about the people who helped build it. He had always been a private person, never one to seek attention or recognition, but now he realized that his influence, his position, gave him the opportunity to do something bigger than himself. He didn't just want to run a restaurant. He wanted to run a place that mattered, a place that had a positive impact on the lives of those who worked there. And as Keanu sat back, watching his team from the restaurant's kitchen window, he finally understood what true leadership meant. It wasn't about being the boss. It was about being the person who helped others succeed, who offered support when things got tough, and who made people feel valued for more than just their work. The restaurant's success continued to grow, but now it was measured by more than just profits. There was an unspoken sense of pride among the employees. Each person knew they were part of something bigger, and that made all the difference. Jessica's transformation was just the beginning. As the months went by, more employees came forward, sharing their stories, their challenges, and their triumphs. Keanu had built a place where they could be open about their struggles without fear of judgment, and it made them more motivated, more loyal, and more passionate about their work. One afternoon, as Keanu was going over the day's receipts in his office, the door creaked open. He looked up, surprised to see Michael, the local entrepreneur who had once challenged his approach, standing in the doorway. "I wanted to come by and apologize," Michael said, a bit sheepish. "I didn't understand what you were doing at first. Honestly, I thought you were making a mistake. But seeing the way your staff works together now, the way they support each other, it's clear that you've built something special." Keanu smiled, his eyes warm. "Thank you, Michael. It's been a journey, but I think we're just getting started." Michael nodded. "I can see that now. If you ever need any help with business development or expanding, let me know. I'd be happy to help out." Keanu shook his head. "I think we're exactly where we need to be, but I appreciate the offer." As the sun set on another busy day at the restaurant, Keanu stood outside for a moment, watching the employees finish their shifts. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would be setbacks, challenges, and tough decisions. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he had found something that truly mattered. Jessica, walking out with a smile on her face, waved at him. Keanu waved back, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. She had come a long way since the first time they'd spoken about the leftovers, and he was proud of her, and of every employee who had stepped up and embraced the changes. They had all grown together. And that was something far more valuable than any award or recognition. Keanu had learned a powerful lesson over the past few months. It's not enough to just run a business well. It's not just about the bottom line or the products you sell. It's about the people you surround yourself with. It's about building an environment where they can thrive, where they feel valued, and where they can grow both professionally and personally. This story wasn't just about one employee, Jessica, or even just about Keanu. It was about every person who walked through the door of that restaurant, every person who had given their time, energy, and passion to make the place what it was. It was a reflection of what happens when people truly care for each other and create a supportive, nurturing community. And that, Keanu realized, was the most powerful thing of all. What do you think is the most important lesson Keanu learned throughout this story? Do you believe a business should prioritize its employees' well-being, or is that something that can be left aside for profits? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've been inspired by Keanu's journey and Jessica's transformation, don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories of growth, support, and success. There's always more to learn, and we can't wait to bring you the next chapter. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The days at Keanu's restaurant were a whirlwind of activity, growth, and deep connections. The changes he had initiated were paying off in more ways than he could have anticipated, and as the months rolled by, he watched his restaurant not only flourish but transform into something entirely unexpected, a true community hub. The restaurant had become a place where people came not just for the food, but for the relationships they built with one another. Keanu had created an environment where vulnerability was welcomed and personal growth was encouraged. It wasn't just about running a business, it was about building a family, and this family was growing stronger each day. But amidst all the success, Keanu had a realization. As much as he had been focused on supporting his employees, he had missed something important, his own need for support. He had been so wrapped up in making sure everyone else was okay, he had neglected to take a step back and reflect on his own journey. The pressure he had felt in the early days of running the restaurant, the loneliness, the isolation, he still carried some of those feelings. One evening, as Keanu closed up the restaurant and sat alone in the kitchen, he allowed himself to pause. The lights were dim and the sound of soft music filled the air. He had been running on autopilot for so long, doing everything in his power to make sure the restaurant was a success, that he had forgotten to check in with himself. He realized he had done more than just transform his business. He had transformed his life. For the first time in a long while, Keanu allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had accomplished. His restaurant was thriving, his team was strong, and his relationships were deeper than ever before. But more importantly, Keanu had found something he hadn't expected, his own sense of purpose. It wasn't just about the food or the business or the accolades. It was about connecting with people, sharing experiences, and being part of something that was greater than himself. The emotional ups and downs of the past few months had taught Keanu something invaluable. Success was not about the tangible rewards. It was about the people, the connections, the relationships, and ultimately, the way he had been able to give back and make a difference in people's lives. Keanu's heart swelled with pride as he thought about Jessica and the other employees. They had all grown in their own ways, and it was clear that they had learned just as much about themselves as they had learned about work. They had each discovered the strength to overcome their personal struggles, and that strength had empowered the entire team. In a way, Jessica's journey had become the heart of the restaurant's transformation. Her story had mirrored the changes that were taking place within the business. She had come in with doubts and fears, and now she was thriving, confident, inspired, and ready to take on new challenges. She was no longer just an employee. She was a symbol of what was possible when people supported one another. Now that the restaurant had found its groove, Keanu realized it was time to pass the torch in a way. The lessons he had learned over the course of the journey were too valuable to keep to himself. It was time for the next step, expanding the mission. He called a staff meeting one evening, asking everyone to gather in the main dining area after the last customers had left. There was excitement in the air, a buzz of curiosity about what Keanu might say. "I want you all to know how proud I am of each and every one of you. This restaurant has become something I never expected, and I owe it to all of you," Keanu began, standing at the front of the room, looking around at the faces he had grown to care for deeply. "But I don't want this to stop here. We've built something powerful together, and I think it's time to take it beyond these walls. I'm ready to open up more spaces, create more opportunities for people to find the support and community they need." The room was silent for a moment, everyone absorbing the weight of his words. "I don't know exactly what that will look like yet," Keanu continued, "but I want us to be part of something bigger. I want to take what we've learned here and bring it to other communities. This is just the beginning." There was a wave of applause that followed, and Jessica stood up with a wide grin on her face, her eyes filled with pride. She had never imagined that her journey, from the moments of struggle to the moments of growth, would lead to this. The restaurant was no longer just a place to work. It had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that with the right support, anything was possible. Keanu's story had come full circle, and the restaurant was just the beginning of a larger mission. But as the story came to an end, Keanu wanted to hear from you. The people who had followed along supported the journey and believed in the changes. What do you think? Can a business truly succeed when it puts people first? Have you ever worked in a place where you felt valued, supported, and encouraged to grow? Share your thoughts and experiences with us in the comments below. And don't forget, this story isn't over yet. The next chapter in Keanu's journey is just beginning. If you're inspired by what you've seen, don't miss out on the next chapter. Hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from.